welcome to the 411 on Cannabinoid Pharmacology. Very excited to be here. My name is Cohen Kakar, and I'm a pharmacist slash pharmacologist, co-founder of the Anthos Group. And I'm joined by a very impressive panel today, and I couldn't be more excited to discuss a topic that we're all very passionate about. I'm joined by Joseph Friedman, who's a pharmacist from Chicago. He's the founding member and principal at Professional Dispensaries of Illinois. He also has a pharmacy degree from the University of Illinois College of Pharmacy and an MBA from Illinois Lake Forest Graduate School of Management. And he's also a host of the Medical Podcast Show, which is a part of the Pharmacy Podcast Network. Dr. Blair Curlis is here with us. He's also a PharmD and PhD. He has a chemical background, and he helped create a patented product working in industry before going to pharmacy school. He earned the PharmD and PhD in pharmaceutical sciences and has also had experience in clinical trials, oncology, and pharmacology as a part of the program. He currently serves as the chief science advisor for the only organization in Georgia advocating and active in reforming laws regarding hemp and marijuana. And I'm also joined by Dr. Najifa Chaudhry, who's a pharmacist from Michigan. She graduated from Wayne State University, and she works in a geriatric clinic as an ambulatory care pharmacist. She's the CEO of Dr. Peace Lily, a booming e-commerce CBD company, and is in retail locations all over the Michigan area. She also serves as an adjunct professor at the University of Michigan and Wayne State University. And finally, we're also joined by Dr. Lola Ahonba, who's the founder of WCI Health. She's also a pharmacist, and WCI Health specializes in alternative health and wellness, and they help HCP, healthcare providers, understand plant-based medicine. She's the author of A Pharmacist's Guide to Cannabis, and she's also the host of a podcast that focuses on cannabis science. Lastly, she is in the process of developing a masterclass on cannabis. As many of you know, pharmacology is a key point of discussion and focus within our industry. The hype behind CBD is one thing, but to actually be able to show the science behind it is another thing. My background is I was in big pharma, and when I started seeing the data around CBD and how it sometimes mimics some of the pharmaceutical action that we see from some of the biggest drugs in the world, that's what excited me to get into this industry, providing patients and consumers alike a natural alternative that's affordable and effective. So with that, I'll go ahead and get into our topics. As I said, pharmacology and the science and the mechanisms are such a big focus of CBD. So I think it would be really great to kind of review why. We hear a lot about what's called the first pass effect, which is liver metabolism. And I'd like to ask Dr. Curlis if you could chime in on what exactly first pass is and ask the panel to add on as they see fit.
Thank you, Cohen. All right. Indianapolis, wake up. How was lunch? All right. So first pass elimination. So when you take in your edibles, your drinks, anything like that, it's going to go through the liver. And that is going to start breaking down the THC. But at the same time, while it's breaking it down, the metabolite for THC is actually stronger than THC itself. So you have a dosing, dilemma there. So different people are going to metabolize it quicker, and depending on what you're having ingested, you could really put yourself into harm's way by having too much of this stuff. So that's one of the things I've noticed with people. They have their edibles, and all of a sudden they're on the floor wanting to die. It's part of that first pass metabolism. You're not going to really get that when you're smoking or inhaling it via your lungs. It's when you ingest it and go through the stomach. That's when it's going to get activated.
Mm-hmm. And something else. Go ahead. Something else to know about the first pass effect is that when you do ingest it and it has to go through your stomach and your intestine, a lot of it will get broken down and destroyed by your stomach acid. And so the concentration of CBD that might get into your bloodstream after you've taken a capsule, that's 30 milligrams, will be very different from maybe taking 30 milligrams of CBD sublingually under your tongue, which will bypass the first pass, but then whatever you swallow will go through that.
And, a case in point to that is the fact that, the product that's on the market that's approved by the FDA, Marinol, it is in sesame seed oil. And, they talk about, when you take one of these Marinol capsules, you're getting maybe 10 to 20% of the total dose because of the first pass effect. Now, when you go ahead and take a look at other routes of administration, rectal, sublingual, topical, you don't have that first pass effect because it's not going through the liver.
And finally, let me just add to the fact that when they talk about first pass metabolism, it's literally going through your stomach and it's being broken down in your liver. That's the medical quote unquote jargons that we have attached to it. So what does that do to your CBD or your active compound that is broken down in your system? Basically, what that does is that it lasts longer. Although it takes a while for it to be broken down because of all the processes that it's going to go through, the final product that you get lasts longer in your system. So when you take that method of taking your medicine, what that does for you is that for people that have chronic condition or they want something that's going to last longer, that is an ideal route for them. If you want something now, you have maybe you have something is hurting in your body and you want relief right now, that might not be the ideal route. And I am done talking.
So as you can see, we're really passionate about the pharmacology here, and I think it's important to know, as we talk about liver metabolism, there's an enzyme which is a common pharmaceutical target called cytochrome P450, which is also what metabolizes CBD. And to the panel's point is once that metabolizes, it affects the absorption, especially of what most CBD is, which is lipid soluble. More and more, we're seeing more water-soluble CBD get introduced to the market, and it's showing a little better absorption rate. I'd like to ask the panel to comment on the oral CBD products. Any experience you guys have in terms of not only the absorption based on the data, but efficacy-wise? What types of modes of transport of the CBD, whether it be a sublingual oil, an edible, what have you seen work well, and why do you think that is?
So I can talk about my experience. Since I have my own line, Dr. Peasley, my top selling product, I would say, is the tincture. The reason people like it is because they can dose it according to however much they need. They can draw it up versus a capsule, which is, one strength. And what I tell my patients all the time is it's best to take CBD with a fatty snack or with a fatty meal just so it can get absorbed better. So with a lot of the tinctures that are on the market, it's usually in a fat-soluble oil just to help with that bioavailability and absorption.
In addition to that, the idea of taking something orally, and we just talked about this with the first pass effect. I was listening to a podcast by a doctor who has his own CBD line a few months ago, and he talked about, when you take something orally, the absorption really is 10% of 10% when it finally gets into your bloodstream. So that's 1%. Now, in practicality, with your CBD line and with my experience running a dispensary, I know for a fact that, some of these products that we're giving to patients, whether it's a sublingual under the tongue tincture, or it's a topical, or it's a rectal suppository, there's going to be an effect, especially with the THC component of the product that we're dispensing.
Absolutely. So we're seeing more and more dosage forms come out based on that type of data. Like Joseph said, what the exact percentages is of what's going into our bloodstream in our patients. A big part of this is the science behind it. And like I mentioned, we see a lot of pharmaceutical drugs and high-priced biologics that target what are called inflammatory cells, which are called cytokines, interleukin-17, TNF-alpha. The reason I bring that up is we're seeing early data from CBD that's able to do the same. Now, not at the same potency, but when you talk about your mild to moderate symptoms in patients, it's an absolutely an alternative that's being more and more adopted. I'd like to ask the panel a little bit more about when they get questions around what the science is of CBD, how's it working on a molecular level, what kind of data do you share, and what's interesting to the consumer and the patients that you all see?
So It really depends on what you're trying to treat. So they will ask me, how is it working and such. I've got a friend who's got Parkinson's. He's got early stage Parkinson's and stuff. It's very, very mild, but he does have issues. But we found that while he can have THC and everything, we found that CBD, much higher doses, along with THC, actually is very beneficial for that. And it took a little while, but yeah, the higher doses might work on a different receptor other than the famed CB2. So there's other side effects and receptors or so that could be the target depending on the dose and what really treats the patient.
Okay, let me. So, apart from, of course, just like Eve mentioned or John mentioned, apart from the fact that we all know that it's like everybody on the street can just recite it, oh, CBD binds to CB2 receptor. And when we are talking about receptor up here, the way I normally explain it to folks is like, think of your key and your lock. You go to work, you're coming back from work, you take your key out, you put it in the lock, you turn it. The receptor is dial lock, and your CBD is dial key that you put in there and you turn it and your door opens. When it opens, what greets you out there? Cool air. If you are living in Florida like me, ta-da. What does that mean? That means the reaction we want. So CBD is so unique. Apart from it being able to bind to that CB2 receptor, which we know now is our machine to open the door for us to see a reaction, it also binds to other receptors. It also binds to CB1 receptor. When you think of CB1 receptor, what should come to mind is your THC. That's the house of THC. But if you have a lot of CBD on board, it's going to kick THC out of here. It's a get out of here. And by that, it can take that position. The other thing it does is that it can also bind to another side that we call it allosteric side. Don't worry about that terms. What that does, I tell people, see, I'm sitting down here beside this amazing man. If I decided to move a little closer to him, I'm going to squeeze him. What does that do? What that does is that it pushes him closer to his environment because it's squished. So what that does to THC, it tampers down the effect of THC that we do not want. And finally, the other part of CBD that is so beautiful is the fact that it also binds to this other receptor that we call trip receptor. Don't worry about the name. When you think about trip, what you should think about is your capsaicin. What does your capsaicin do? Can somebody tell me what capsaicin do? Capsaicin that you buy over the counter? Love you for that. That's what it does. And that doesn't even have anything to do with CB2 receptor or at all. Finally, it also binds to serotonin receptor. And when we talk about serotonin, it's like RoboCop to the rescue. It does so many things. When it's binding on our brain, it binds to your gut. But when it's binding on the brain, what does that do for you? That is where you see it helps to calm you down. And when you are calm, what happens? You are able to sleep. We know we can't claim all kind of effect because of the restriction, but I call it RoboCop to the rescue. It's amazing what this cannabinoid can really do. And don't worry about cannabinoid. It's just the chemical in your plant. Thank you, guys.
Absolutely. No, that was a great breakdown.
I am here to take the medical jargons out of here. That is that's my strategy. Because we don't want to scare folks, you know. People are like, I'm not going to chemistry 101 or medchem. Don't worry, we can take the medical jargons out of it and bring it down to people's level. And I'm going to let the other guys take over. Yeah. These people are amazing.
I think you had a question?
Yeah, I just want to clarify. So if CBD has more of an affinity to the CBD2 or the CB2 receptor than our delta 9 THC has, then what is, like, from a formulation standpoint, what is the benefit of having something that has, you know, THC added to it when it's mainly a CBD product? If the CBD is basically just going to tamper down whatever the THC is going to do. If that makes sense.
I kind of understand what you're going for, but I can clarify that CBD itself does not really target CB2 receptors per se. It enhances the effect, but if you really want to target the of that receptor, whereas THC directly agonizes the CB1 receptor.
Okay.
CBD just enhances the effects, whether it could be positive or negative.
Yeah, to add to that, I mean, that's kind of the cool thing about CBD is that it does have action, low affinity to the CB2, like you said, but those other inflammatory cells that it can actually inhibit, that's where we're seeing a lot of efficacy as well.
Yeah. THC is an agonist that we all know of the CB1 and CB2 receptors, and that's where the intoxicating effects come from. It's the tail of the THC molecule that really dictates its CB receptor activity. For example, THCV, which is Tetrahydrocannabinol, a lot of people look at that as an appetite suppressant. THCV has a shorter 3-carbon tail at the end, and it acts like a blocker instead of an activator. And there's also a product out there called Undo, and I used to have samples of this in my dispensary, UNDOO. What was interesting about Undo, it's the tail end of the THC molecule, and what it does is it takes, it reacts with the intoxicating effects of THC, and it moves into the receptor and it displaces the THC. So, for example, if you're very high and you're very uncomfortable, and I used to have a lot of senior citizens that were concerned about that having an effect on them, they take 1 or 2 capsules of this Undo, and within 5 to 20 minutes, they can come down very, very quickly.
I think it's a good point too, actually. When you talk about THC, and one phrase we see thrown a lot around in CBD products is non-psychoactive, right? Even full spectrum. There's not enough THC that is psychoactive. I'm not a big fan of that phrase because I feel like we know that there is some action, right? It's just not giving you that euphoric high that THC is known for. I'd like to hear from the panel a little bit about what their experience is specifically with the THC content in CBD products. Have you noticed certain effects that come from the full spectrum versus the broad spectrum, whether it be a certain symptom like anxiety or pain even? Is there any experience you guys can share with that?
I think the idea of incorporating CBD with THC in an edible is a great idea, especially if you're concerned about the patient having psychoactivity from the dose. And again, you really want to start with a lower dose. You're probably all familiar with 2.5 mil. I would rather have a patient not have any effect than have an over effect. And so when I had some of these sensitive patients come in, I would say, okay, let's start with 5 milligrams of a 1-to-1 THC to CBD and see how you do. And so that for their sleep issues, their CBD in there to kind of avoid some of those psychoactive effects.
Please.
You have a dispensary. Okay. I'm 61 years old, and I've always been a fan of marijuana all my life. Okay. And I tried the CBDs. Yeah, they say it separates from the THC, that. Why can't we just have it all? I don't see anything wrong with the THC. You know, why can't somebody just have the THC and the CBD all together?
I think it really depends on the person. So it seems like for you, you love THC, and that's great. If THC works for you, continue doing it. So for me personally, you know, being a clinical pharmacist, I can't take THC because I do get drug tested at work. So then I'm left with trying CBD only. So some people, they do have that dilemma where they can't, you know, use THC even if they want to.
Yeah, because like me, I've had THC all my life, but now when I take CBD, it's like I'm getting used to it. You see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So
you know, but it probably come along later on because, like I said, I'm getting old. I'm 61 years old, so I'm kind of coming down the THC thing because I was a young, you know, younger life thing for me. Okay, but now I'm getting into the CBD now, but it's like, you know, I just took one this morning, you know, the energy thing, you know? But again, if I had done the regular THC, I'd be feeling it right now, you know? Okay, but like you guys said, I gotta, you know, it takes more time, which is true.
The other thing I'm just going to say to that is the fact that THC is not a bad guy. You get what I'm saying? It's not a bad guy. These are medicine. In our body is already producing its own compound that's similar to THC. Your body doesn't produce what it does not need. We have that system in our body. I'm sure most of you know endocannabinoid system, but now we are beat it to death and we are waking it up and beating it for more. So we already have anandamide. So let us not think. I know people, sometimes it makes it look as if THC is bad. THC is not bad. See, these compounds we are talking about, they have what we call biphasic. What it means is that sometimes in a low dose, they will do something, and in a high dose, they will do something totally different. I like to bring it in with analogy of a husband and wife. They are like the whole couples that they get on each other's nerves sometimes, but at the same time, they coexist together. So all this compound, even the opioid that we are trying to get away from, if you look at their structures, their backbone, they're all similar. So it just depends on what we are treating, just like the lady said. It depends on what we are treating. And you got to realize that THC, because it works in the brain, mostly in the brain, central nervous system, spinal cords, and all that stuff, it has a lot of neuroprotective activities. There's a lot of beauty that comes with THC, but we can combine it with CBD to get some of the effect. But for people that cannot take THC, I have what they call them, firefighters, first responders in my group that they cannot take THC. So in that situation, what I tell them is that we have another power in our toolbox, which is your toppings. Toppings are found all over the world. They are found in our nature, in your orange, in everything that we see. We have toppings. And you mentioned earlier BCP. The beautiful thing about BCP, that's beta-carotene, is a topping. At the same time, it's also a cannabinoid. I mean, like a compound. It's kind of acting like a topping, and it's also acting as something like CBD. So for people that cannot take those THC for any reason, you can always add those toppings, which has been proven to also have medicinal properties as well.
Absolutely. And, you know, there's a school of thought out that says, you know, the plant is in its natural form. When we talk about the hemp plant, as we know, high in CBD, low in THC, the more we process it, the more we take out of it, whether it be THC, you're kind of playing with nature at that point. And what are we doing to those products? So to your point, it is in its most natural form with the THC, and maybe we'll start seeing more regulation favored towards that as we get more clinical data.
And, you know, in pharmaceutical development, I mean, traditionally, pharmaceutical companies, they've got their laboratories, they make these one molecule drugs. And uh, and when you look at science, back in the day, back in the 200 years ago, people were using medicines taken from the ground, taken from plants and trees. And the closer you get to nature, the less side effects you have. The more you isolate molecules, the more let me rephrase that. The closer you get to nature, the less side effects you have. The more you take these one molecule drugs, the more side effects you have. And we see this in pharmaceuticals. And so the cannabis plant in its natural form is probably the best thing, but it's going to be very hard to study from the standpoint of pharmaceutical companies because they don't know what to do with a plant that has over 500 compounds in it.
And that's such a perfect segue to what I had here next is you all mentioned beta-caryophyllene, fantastic terpene, so much data behind it, especially when you talk about inflammation, wound healing. So what we're starting to see a little bit of is what works synergistically with CBD. And it goes without saying the natural ingredients of the hemp plant do well. Is there any other ingredients that you all have had experience with, especially when we talk about topicals, when we, that transdermal absorption? Is there any ingredients that you've seen work well with CBD to achieve that pharmacokinetic action that we strive for?
So when it comes to topicals, what I've been seeing on the market, there's so many added ingredients that are in the topical formulation. So it's like I've seen CBD with menthol, I've seen CBD with emu oil, I've seen CBD with like arnica flower extract, or even with lidocaine. And so with all of those other ingredients, for example, the menthol, when you apply it, you instantly feel that cooling sensation. You instantly kind of feel that relief. And I think that's really cool because with a lot of patients, they're used to taking a medication and having it work right away. So if they take a Tylenol or an NSAID or an opioid, they want their pain gone right away. And sometimes with topical CBD, it just takes a little while for the action to kick in, for your pain relief to go away. Or if you're taking it orally, for example, it might have to build up in your body, or you might have to find that perfect dose. And so when you're adding additional ingredients to the topical, such as the menthol or the lidocaine, I think in a way it's great because at least they'll get that instant relief, and then the CBD will kick in and do its thing.
And in addition to that, I used to be a compounding pharmacist, and a lot of the drugs that we used to make contained a product called, Lipiderm. And Lipiderm helps the molecule of the drug go through the top 3 layers of the skin. Well, that gives you an effect. And we also have to differentiate the fact that when you put a topical on, are you putting it on just on a sore shoulder and you just want the activity there, or are you putting on a patch where you're putting it on your wrist or the bottom of your foot where you've got good blood supply and you want systemic activity? And for those products, I think we still have a ways to go to figure out, what we can put into those products to assist the molecules getting through all the layers of the skin.
I use the energy. That's my favorite. And I have problem with caffeine. I always have problem, all that, because my job requires me to stay up all night. So I always have problem taking coffee and all those things. But with the energy CBD, I don't have all those after effects. It's just it's the best thing. I get the same energy and the same everything, but not that all that after effects you get from coffee and all that. I don't get that. So it works for me. Like I said, I just took one this morning, and I'm just good.
Good. No, I think that speaks to kind of what we're talking about. Is there is synergistic potential if we identify the right ingredients. I love the example of menthol. We have a sports recovery line called Title Sport, and menthol activates those same receptors that cold therapy would, like ice or ice bath, things like that. And by activating those receptors, you're increasing blood flow, which increases absorption of the CBD and other plant-based ingredients. So, as we look into innovation, I think we're going to see a lot more of that. To your point,
Yeah.
energy products,
Yeah,
immunity,
yes,
even
yes.
that can complement CBD
Yeah,
potentially and
yeah.
leverage the anti-inflammatory
Yeah,
effects.
because before all this, I'm not a coffee person. I'm not. I drink a cup of coffee. The same thing with but now you take a little CBD, do the same thing. You don't have all that.
That's perfect.
Craziness with the coffee.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
just peaceful. Yeah. Okay, that's me.
So we have about 10 minutes left. I wanted to give the audience an opportunity if there's any burning questions. Please.
The metabolite created from THC versus metabolite created from CBD during first pass metabolism. I may have misheard you guys, but so when THC is metabolized, is the metabolite more potent, and then when CBD gets metabolized, it's less potent? Or because I feel like I've heard a lot regarding like surrounding formulations that you want to create something that is water soluble, that is super small, so that way you can surpass the metabolism and you get the most effect, which kind of implies that when CBD is metabolized, that it's basically going to be less potent. But so is it the opposite for THC, or did I mishear that, or can you guys clarify?
Yeah, with THC, the metabolite itself at the receptor is more potent than THC itself. With CBD, I don't know enough on that to answer it. But if you look, yeah, it's that first pass metabolism that can change up things. So if you can bypass that, you can just keep it THC itself, or the 11-hydroxy THC, which is the metabolite. It just really depends on what you're going for.
Think of it from a practical standpoint. When you take an edible and nothing happens for half an hour, 40 minutes, and you take 10 more, that's a mistake. Okay, and that's because the metabolite, the 11-hydroxy THC, is more potent, and you feel that. With CBD, if you have a more active metabolite of CBD, you're not going to feel that. It's going to be like taking an aspirin. All of a sudden, an hour after you take Tylenol or aspirin, your headache's gone. Well, they must have done something. And so it's really that sense of well-being that you could get, and it might not be as obvious when you take CBD.
Great point.
Yeah. Most of the conversation today has been about CBD, and you guys have mentioned a couple of times about like the enzyme tracks that break down and some of the concerns about other pharmaceuticals. Does it work the same with CBN, CBC, CBG? Are you using the same enzyme track? Because there are products obviously out there that are simply CBG, simply CBN, whatever. Are there concerns there? I'm sure there's concerns, but you get the question. Is it the same enzyme track? Is CBD synonymous to CBG, CBN, CBC?
Yeah, there's even a difference between THC and CBD itself. So CBD will go through CYP2C19, and THC will go through CYP2C9. So there is a little bit of a variance in there. With CBN and CBG, I am not familiar with them and how they're being metabolized. But I will say that since CBN is extremely close to THC, it might be metabolized through the same enzymes. But yeah, you will have different interactions and such. Big thing that I'm educating people about is THC. The CB1 receptors are found in the stomach. They're found on the parietal cells with stomach acid. So if you take that edible, you're going to have a acid reduction right there in your stomach, just like taking, if you go and get Nexium or something like that at the over-the-counter. You have drug interactions right then and there. Some drugs want stomach acid, some don't want the stomach acid. So it depends on what you're taking.
There's going to be a presentation tomorrow on all the minors, and we'll get into that. And I think one of the glaring things that's going to come out of that is we haven't done the research on them, just because of the illegality at the federal level. So I think all of this is coming. It's just going to take time.
But it's definitely the next wave. We got to figure out CBG and CBN as we see more products hit the market. Yes.
Thanks. I'm curious to know if there are any solid peer review journals or references that you can give us so that we can follow up. I mean, there's a lot of awesome information that I'd love to drill down on, but I'm not sure where those credible places for information are. So if you can share that where you go, that'd be awesome. And if it's your own work, please tell me that too, okay?
Yeah. So one of the things that I looked into when I first started to research into CBD and I wanted to find out more was with the federally approved Epidiolex, which is an isolate of CBD. They did do a lot more research and studies on it before it came on the market. So I remember I just opened up the package insert for Epidiolex and I just kind of went through that and read it and seen like what they found out from the studies, and that helped, just increase my knowledge bank and figure out how CBD that we're buying online or companies are selling, how that might work or interact with other medications or just the pharmacology of it.
The other places that I go to is PubMed, but PubMed, sometimes the not so cool thing about that website is a government website is the fact that you might sometimes only get the abstract, as in they don't give you the whole thing, so sometimes you have to buy it. And if you also go to reputable websites, sometimes they link the articles to that website. So sometimes I try to bypass PubMed like that. Like if you have a website, I can come to your website and see what articles you use in your blog. Then I can just see the references and get it from there. Yes, we have to pay for everything literally these days.
And we're seeing a lot of journals being released specifically. There's one that I sit on the board for, American Journal of Endocannabinoid Medicine, and they're doing not only independent case studies, but looking at bigger trials as well. So we're seeing more and more. I hate to cut us short. They're waving me off. The panelists will be available for questions here. If you have any one-on-one questions, feel free to approach them. Thank you all for attending. This was a fantastic conversation. Thank you, panelists. Always a pleasure. Thank you for your attendance.
Thank you, Cole. Thank you so much.